At least 6 Ukrainian deputy defence ministers were fired on Monday following the appointment of a new defence minister earlier this month. The government gave no reason for the dismissals, but such moves are common after a new minister's appointment. Those removed include 6 deputy defence ministers as well as the State Secretary of the Defence Ministry. The reshuffling of the department came a day after Ukraine's military said it captured the village of Kleshchik from Russian troops after months of fierce battles.
I would like to especially recognize the warriors who are gradually regaining Ukraine's territory in the area of Bakhmut, the 80th Air Assault Brigade, the 5th Separate Assault Brigade, the glorious 95th and Fury Joint Assault Brigade of the National Police Force. Well done.
Since the dismissal of earlier Defence Minister Oleksiy Reznikov, the government has been investigating accusations of corruption in the military related to purchasing equipment. Reznikov was removed following a scandal involving the Defence Ministry's procurement of military jackets at 3 times their cost. And even though Reznikov denied the allegations, he later resigned. Well, Russia invaded Ukraine in February last year, and Ukraine launched a counter-offensive in June that so far has been marked by small victories but no major breakthrough. Despite being bolstered by NATO standard weapons worth billions of dollars, the Ukrainian military officials have said there are no quick solutions to puncture Russia's defensive lines, and only slow, grinding battles have led to heavy losses. In an effort to draw more support, President Zelensky is headed to the US, where he's expected at the White House, and on Capitol Hill this week as he visits during the United Nations General Assembly.
President Biden will then return to Washington to host President Zelensky of Ukraine here at the White House on Thursday. And this will be their 3rd meeting here at the White House, and it certainly comes at a critical time, as Russia desperately seeks help from countries like North Korea for its brutal war in Ukraine.
Well, for more on this, we're joined by Professor David Dunn, a Professor of International Politics at the University of Birmingham, joining us from Birmingham this morning. Many thanks for your time, Professor. Just give us your assessment on this news of those sackings in the Ukrainian Defence Department.
Well, this is obviously very embarrassing for Ukraine and for President Zelensky in particular, because this comes on the eve of his trip, as you say, to the United States. But it's also worth recognizing the scale of the financial and military aid that is pouring into Ukraine from a whole variety of different directions. In terms of the scale of that aid and the scale of the suggested corruptions is relatively small. And in essence, the aspect of temptation that is there would mean that it would be requiring everyone to be a saint if there wasn't some evidence of corruption in Ukraine, given that the billions of dollars that are coming from Europe and America and elsewhere to help the Ukrainian war effort.
And Professor, this war is obviously turning into a very much of a grind on both sides, very little progress in terms of victories for either side, Ukraine edging forward. I mean, are you sensing any fatigue from the wider global world, the US, the UK, in terms of supporting Ukraine? Or do you think that support will be there for as long as Ukraine needs it?
Well, I think there were hopes and expectations that there would be major breakthroughs in the counter-offensive. And as you say, they have not been gained, despite the huge numbers of losses suffered by Ukraine in efforts to do so. There have, of course, been other gains militarily for Ukraine, but not through breaches in those defenses, but rather through attrition and attacks behind those lines and the destruction of depots, of major targets, including warships and aircraft. But there is a degree of both frustration and indeed sadness that those gains have not been made, and that has led on some quarters to criticism of the tactics that Ukraine has taken, and of course concern on some parts that Ukraine will never break through, and therefore that there needs to be some negotiations. But for the most part, there has also been a concomitant promise of military aid. The European Union has promised military aid to Ukraine for years to come, making the point that actually the European Union is there with Ukraine for the long term. Similarly, the United States government and Congress have passed funding years in advance to try and stop anyone in the future removing the prospect of those aid packages being delivered. But there are voices, particularly on the American right in the Republican Party, among candidates who would seek presidential office, and of course among President himself, former President Trump himself, who indicate that if he were elected in November next year, that he would quickly seek to bring the war to an end. And the expectation for most observers is that would mean him forcing Ukraine into some form of capitulation. And of course, given those voices, what that means is that gives hopes to Vladimir Putin to keep going with the war, in the hope that if he gets a Republican in the White House, then things will change for him.
Yes, it's going to be fascinating. US election set to play a pivotal role, we might find, in this. Professor David Dunn, Professor of International Politics, joining us from Birmingham in the UK. Many thanks.
Thank you.